I don't remember much except that we had this teacher called Miss Rooseboom, and I just remember she was pretty tough. And I don't know who the other teacher was in the other class, but I always envied like the grass is greener. But I remember standard sub A because that was a year I got caned by Mr. Hunter in sub A for a fight at waiting for the E6 bus with a guy whose name I shouldn't mention over what I thought was bullying. And he would have a very different story, but we were sent to Hunter. And the thing that I remember was he probably hit us very softly, but I remember that my mother waited afterwards and she treated me like a hero. And she had ice cream to celebrate that I'd stood up, and you know, and that sort of subverted the whole notion of respect for the school authority. That she thought, you know, this was a great thing. And you know, I remember a story that she once told about her migrant father, who was, you know, came out in the 1890s. He was a lot older. And you know, his younger brother was badly treated by a teacher at Paul Gymnasium, and he. My understanding from the story is that the teacher never hit anyone for quite a while afterwards, after my grandfather went to visit him. so it was a kind of a, you know, but so she had this attitude that a protective attitude that came to the fore when she thought people like Oosthuizen were bullying her children. She went in and took them on. And so you know, those are some of my memories. But SACS Junior School, for me, the highlight of SACS Junior, there are a couple of things, was marbles. I loved marbles, and I really deeply regretted that they said it, they got rid of it because there were complaints, I think, that we were like a bazaar, you know, but marbles was my whole joy at being at school. And you know, I think, you know, there were guns and einies and you know, it was like you know, it was just a beautiful part of the school day. Yeah, that was my junior school highlight. That and being the worst. Sorry. Yeah, shy up. Yeah, that's right. And that and actually being the worst player in the under 11A rugby team that had all the heroes in it. We were undefeated. I was a tight head prop, and I was by far the worst player, I think. I was a tight head prop. The hooker was Graham Belair's, and on the other side of him was Anthony Nocton Smith, I think. And then others were in the team were Hugo Hammond and Minnick and Jackson and Colin White and all of these guys who were and my close friend at one stage was Neil van der Wiel at that stage, which is probably the reason. And we also used to play a game on the playground where you had to run between trees and force away, and if you were caught, and I used to come back with blazers ripped, and that was also a lot of fun. I think the other later highlight for me was, and the only other time I ever got caned by a head, you know, was McEwen caned us. We were sent by Miss Willemse, and I was incredibly honored to be caned with Mike Canty, Peter Barnett, and Charles Edelstein. And I thought, I was the they were the real deal, you know, and I was just along for the ride. I remember in a little room there was a mirror, and he said, "Who's go first?" And I said, "I'll go first." I wanted to get it done with, and I felt incredibly proud to be caned with those guys. That was the highlight. That was great. I think that's the highlight of my school career, was being caned with those guys. and come to think of it, you know, Mike Canty actually published a book of poems of mine, which is there. I won't haul it out. I called it Putt Course, and it was, you know, and he suggested on his water course, and I was also incredibly honoured that Mike did that, you know, and I think back on him as a longtime friend. We're still friends. I look back at Mike and the sweetness of his brother Peter, his late brother Peter, and the sweetness of his brother David, and our parents were friends. But I think of Mike, and I think in high school I keep thinking that if the prefect system was fair dinkum, and they were acknowledging input and creative input, and then Mike Canty would have been head boy, I reckon, or at least acknowledged as somebody who put enormous. And I remember as a guy who started in my standard whatever it is in mid high school, already writing poetry, that the incredible support that guy gave right through. When I'd go back to Cape Town and see Mike, there was a strong interest in this stuff, and he could remember some of the poems. And so yeah, that's my tuppence worth. I salute you, Mike Canty, and Charles Edelstein, and Peter Barnett, and thanks for getting me caned for whatever we did. I still bear the scar with pride. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, it's lovely.
I do think that I was yeah. Look, those guys had a lot of gumption, a lot of guts. They were prepared to face the cane. I certainly wasn't. I was trying to dodge it.
So that was in junior school.
In standard sub B, there was a teacher called Mrs. Lewis, a lovely lady, really loved. She filled in for somebody, Miss Ellis or somebody, and there were a couple of really, we could joke about Henschel Wood, whatever his name was, Henschel, whatever, whatever. I thought McEwen was a nasty piece of work. I thought Warner was, with his cane at the thing, was a nasty piece of work. I thought Miss Timmins was a nasty piece of work. So I don't want to dwell on these kind of things, because there were some really lovely people there, yeah, they were good people. We had this fabulous rugby coach, and also a teacher called Laidlaw. I don't know if you remember Laidlaw, lovely guy. And I'm sorry if I hope you can cut out where I've said negative about other than Oosthuis and those guys. But I don't feel that I really want to get stuck into anyone.
No,
I really don't.
No.
I don't. Yeah. The first thing I remember was we had Latin with Doug Brown, and I remember him coming and taking me by the back of the hair. I'd had this haircut, which I thought I was quite pleased with, and he lifted me up and he said, "Don't you think you need a haircut?" And they brought a barber. And I must say I don't know, you mentioned somebody having a story about Doug Brown, and I don't know what that is, but Doug Brown was the guy who really passionately engaged with poetry that I, and when he was so, he was so intimidating, and and yet he was also quite inspiring in a way. He was actually, quite an inspiring character, in that he took whatever he was doing hell of a seriously, and he was passionate, but he was also very, very dismissive of people. I mean, if I was treated by the science teachers where I was a total dud, and the maths teachers, if they treated me the way Doug Brown treated guys who weren't into English, I would have suffered. We had more gentle science teachers. They didn't treat us like Doug Brown treated. There was a beautiful guy called Mr. Kelly who taught us English. There was a wonderful history teacher called Ali Abrams who taught us about the patterns of history. And there was, this wonderful Duis Campbell. And, the funny thing is we are older than all these people now, than Duis Campbell when he was probably, I just think we had, but, there's teachers who really inspire you and people who inspire you. And we had I don't know if you were in the class when we had a visiting teacher called Mr. Eaton, Tony Eaton. And why was And wait a minute, Tony Eaton came in and he wrote on the blackboard, I'll never forget, and I think John Little remembered this, he wrote on the blackboard a haiku by Issa, the Japanese haiku poet. And I remember I'd never heard of haiku, I'd never heard of Issa, but he wrote, the dewdrop world is a dewdrop world, and yet, and bang, that sort of really hit me. And then he was gone. He was there for a term.
So well.
He was just,
you read,
yeah, look, he was a guy it was sad that he was there for a short while, wasn't he? He was like a fill-in sort of for, but I remember you were in a class with me with Mr. Schroeder, and I remember that your initiative, I think, was, what did he teach us? I can't remember.
Latin.
English or
Latin.
He was this fantastic teacher, and he had this great sense, a warmth to him. And at the end of the year, we bought him a bottle of champagne. This is your initiative, with 21 straws. Oh, geez. Look, there's so many, kind of memories. There's things you don't credit. Like we had an art teacher for 1 year, Miss Parker, and I wished we had art going through. And I just remember her. There was a guy I was friendly with at the time. I think his name was Urbaniak or something in the beginning. And I remember her coming, and we messed around. So I took a piece of thing and I splashed, and I slashed around, and I remember she came around and she looked at it, and then she looked at it, and I thought, I'm in trouble. And then she walked away, and she looked at it, and then she walked away. And when we came back the next week to class, she'd framed it. The things, like lovely sort of people that I remember. I was, I really ducked out of. I played you were one of the hockey heroes. I played hockey one year, but then I got back into rugby for a while. I wish that we played soccer. I loved soccer, but I used to end up having to. They told me because of my build, which is not very flattering, I had to play tight head prop. And I was one of, I don't know whether 11 or so guys who played against Settlers when, I don't know how many guys, but about 6 of our guys didn't turn up. It was like the Alamo. Whitefoot put, we were slaughtered. We played with, we played in the front row. We had no flanks, no 8th man. We had somebody playing. I'm making this up. I don't know, but I from memory, we had a guy who played scrum half and fly half, and years later, my closest friend in Cape Town, one of my close friends, I met him years at the end of matric, and Mark Cotton, and I said to him, he was at Settlers, and I said to him, Mark, you weren't that blonde guy who ran through the middle and scored all those tries, and it was him. But yeah, look, I know that it was, and I was in a rugby team with Mark Silliphant, a beautiful guy, Mark Silliphant. He was your friend. I remember when he was in the Navy, Mark was such a lovely guy. And I remember he busted his collarbone because he tackled a Paul Roos wing and was dragged down. But that, I was such a lousy rugby player as well. And, tight head prop was never my idea. I always felt that was like building pyramids for the Egyptians. You sort of laboring and sweating away while other people were having fun in the back line. But soccer, and I always thought soccer was. We used to have soccer games in on the field and stuff with a pine cone or a tennis ball or whatever. And weekends I used to play soccer, and I used to barrack for Olenek. Go to soccer games at Hartleyvale on one Friday and Greenpoint the next. And soccer was my, was a passionate thing. But I always thought the reason we didn't have soccer is they didn't want to dilute the rugby. They didn't want to lose, people who would have been great rugby players. The good guys would have, some of them might have gone to play soccer. And somehow it didn't bother them that you guys played hockey. You were a goalkeeper, weren't you? You were a goalkeeper.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, which is probably a risky gambit there.
It's stupid. No faith.
And I think of of SACS, all boys, prestigious school. You know, I must admit, yeah, the other memory is in Standard 6, Herr Vogt told us there was such a thing as the nalopers. Nalopers were people like me who got on their bike, or if I didn't get the E6 or get a lift from my mother or something, I'd get on my bike, I'd just get the hell out of the place. And so I never stuck around for band practice. I could have, you know, you could have learned an instrument. There were chess teams, there were film, you know, and only when my kids started going to the local school here did I realize how privileged we were to go to a school that was, and I was, you know, really cynical of Kabumalaka, Kabumalaka, and the whole the chant, and Johnny Hens getting up there, and the best in the country round and all that. I never took. I'm also somebody who regretted that we went to boaters from these beautiful grey felt hats that you could mold into cowboy type hats. We missed out on that, I think. When I think about it, and I missed out on Sanssouci girls because I never got into Gilbert and Sullivan.
Actually,
when I thought about it afterwards, I thought Sanssouci. I thought Gilbert and Sullivan was a price worth, you know, the HMS Pinafore, whatever it was probably a price that I should have. Yeah, look, my dad in his 60s, he died. He was 70 when he died, but he discovered he'd always loved painting, and he'd encourage young artists and stuff. But he started painting, and it was like something that he had to work through. And I feel in some ways really close to what he did. And I just loved his painting. It was very naive, and he took it serious enough to sit through the night doing it, but he thought he was just, you know, he thought it was useless. But he did it. And some of it was just really wonderful. And, you know, I'm not sure, not by the standards of whatever, but, you know, it was a wonderful thing. So that was something that I really,
so both
really,
your parents
really valued. Yeah, look, my dad was was a businessman, and but he discovered, but he used to have an office, and next to his office was an office, and the office was an office of one of his brothers who was a partner in the business, who was never there. They were doing other stuff, and it was filled with all the paintings he couldn't bring home, you know. That's like me with books and music. In fact, I remember your music collection, and I remember you had, amazing records for that time. I played guitar until a friend of mine, and I still, you know, pick it up. But a friend about a year ago sent me an instrument called an oud, which is an Arabic instrument. And I have become absolutely a bit obsessive about it. And so once a week, I have lessons and play this thing, this oud, all this Arabic, learning music. Yeah, I mean, I can show you the instrument, but it's a beautiful instrument. But it's you know, it's learning. I've got a fabulous teacher, and I was gifted this beautiful instrument that was, you know, from Turkey, and so, you know, I'll show you the instrument if you like. I'll grab it. I'll show you. I'll show it quickly. Yeah, so this turned up on my doorstep, and you play it with I carry in my back pocket what's called a risha. In fact, I should have a back pocket risha in my back pocket. Maybe I don't. Maybe I've just got and it's like a plectrum that's, and you're holding it in your palm. I'm not really holding it. I need to sit and I'm still, but you play. I mean, to improvise is called a taksim. But so at the moment. Anyway, that's and you've got this risha, and you can, yeah, I'm trying, I'm learning pieces in, which are popular music to Arabic people, to people that I've never heard of. It's like, for them, it would be our equivalent of Proud Mary or something. Songs music that Uskada and Ayazain and these things and to play this thing, this is aspirational. To play it, I can play pieces. There's a Moroccan piece that I play that's really beautiful, but it's not something I've created. It's something that the guys that I'm learning with has created this beautiful piece. And I can play it, but I need to play it with music, with a thing. But what he does, what I'm working towards, is called a taqsim, and a scale is called a maqam, and a maqam, M-A-Q-A-M, is a kind of a scale. It's a linked notes, and you take a maqam and you improvise. But to improvise, you start drawing on traditional pieces in the key, and you just have little pieces in. And this guy, Phil, who teaches, has been playing for decades. I said, Phil, when you play the piece, and I played it's rudimentary. When you play it, it's like something else. And he said, oh, Larry said, I've been playing for decades. You've just been playing for a year or something. So anyway, so guitar. I was playing guitar, like a lot of open tuning stuff, and I've got diverted, and I plan to get back to guitar. That's my diversion.
Yeah.
You remember Peter Beasley showed us his how to play. Do you know there was a guy called Peter Beasley in our class? Is that right?
Yes.
He played. Is he coming to this thing? He came to class once and showed us how he's learning to play classical guitar. I remember once. But yeah. But the thing I mustn't forget is, and I don't know whether Graham or Mike or Charles would remember this, but in Standard 4, my memory, which is questionable at best, is that Mike must have been the editor. We brought out once and one only a publication called The Monthly Peanuts. And my memory, and I'd be interested to know, Graham, that his father roneoed, or whatever the expression is, at the Bottle Top factory, the Monthly Peanuts, and we sold it on the playground for $0.01. And then we took a rand or whatever it was. I don't know who would have bought this thing. And I remember that it had a story about a lunatic called Larry who'd escaped from an asylum. I just don't remember the rest of it, but for some reason. Yeah, look, I just, and I was very, very friendly with Charles. We end up in different parts of the world. We end up in and out of French, in and out of contact. I'm in contact more than I ever was with Graham Belair's. I caught up once with on Facebook, lovely guy. He was the house captain which is a head boy in primary school. And he was the hooker in the under 11A. And I teased him once that told people I was coming to visit a hooker I once knew. But he's a lovely guy, really, really. John Little used to sit behind me in Doug Brown's class, and he was a lovely guy. They were really, 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 really lovely people that I remember. I remember Kevin Stegeman was a lovely guy. You were friendly with him, a nice guy, really, really nice guy. They were, we had some good people. And we sadly lost good people. And I think of Alex Massoon, I think of Mark Siliphant, John Sandler. I'm running out of memory of who's gone, but you'd know. And we're not. Sorry. Yeah, Terry de Jong. Terry, I bumped into. I was visiting I used to live in Sydney, and we went up with the kids to visit Sydney from Melbourne, and we were at the Rocks in Sydney, and there was this guy, I hadn't seen him in about 20 years or something, and I said to my son, this is what he was talking. We were standing outside, there used to be a left-handed shop, and I said to my son, this guy would be what Terry de Jong, not that he changed that much. And I said quite softly, Terry. And I thought, if this guy doesn't hear, then it's not him. And he spun around, and then he came down to Melbourne, and I took a day off, and we spent a day together, just going around. What a beautiful guy! What a lovely guy! What a tragedy that he he was gone. And others. I actually once had this thought. There was a guy in our class called Romanovsky.
Leon.
I don't know if you remember. And I don't know why, but I just Googled him, and I found an obituary. Unless it's not him, I hope it's not him. But and I thought,
actually, Larry, I think it's you.
Is it? Yeah. And I just thought, and I remember the Thompson parties. They were famous parties. Sorry, guys, you weren't invited, but you can take it out on Andrew. But they were beautiful, beautiful, beautiful events with your sister Marianne, and the music and I remember going with and I remember bumping into people in the army in national service. I became friendly with Graham Brown, who lives out here in Australia. Really nice guy. He's played music. Rang me the other day. Every couple of years or something, I hear from him. He doesn't live in Melbourne anymore, but and his son wrote this beautiful book and was a rugby player. And I remember in the army one day bumping into two people, Uber Holzer, who was teaching maths at the academy in Naval Academy, and Peter Minnick. And at that stage, I deferred, so I did army late. And the three of us, I remember marching. You have to march walking off in a certain order. It would be Major Lieutenant Minnick and Lance Corporal Schwartz. And that sort of order. And Peter Minnick, what a lovely guy, I mean, people, Chris Hugo. And it was a strange mix. I was thinking about it. I was thinking, because I ended up going to Stellenbosch after UCT and before I went to the army. But I remember, and I've had such a wonderful connection with, the Stellenbosch friends there still. And I've got a really strong friendship. But I kind of realized how from the names of our guys in our class, were 5 in every 25 or so were Jewish. And I was thinking about this, they were Jewish people, including me, whose parents didn't want to be too Jewish. In other words, they didn't want to send them to Herzliya. You didn't see anyone wearing a kippah, yarmulke type thing. And Afrikaans guys, whose parents didn't want to send them to, Voortrekker, Hoërskool or whatever, Voortrekker, whatever it was. There was LaRue and Warren Creer and Nodi, and these are Afrikaans Minnick and Afrikaans Sicho Haman, Afrikaans names, people of Africa. So it was kind of a really interesting mix, and it brought together people from different. It had the illusion of being this prestigious elite school in a way that bishops did or whatever, but it was and it wasn't. It was also a mix of people, and my nephew was one of the SACS boys, one of the first SACS boys who wasn't white, who became a SACS boy. What we used to call white. I don't know if it's still white. We're still white, but and I remember driving up SACS and coming in when I was visiting in 2017 or so. Guy at the gate at the bottom, because they closed up the top. I thought, do I want to go through SACS? Okay, let's do it. And I had this hire car, and the guy at the gate said to me, when did you matriculate? And I said, 1973. And he looked at me, he said, I wasn't born yet. and I met the headmaster. I pulled up the car and went out, and there was this lovely woman that used to work there, Craig Ortlip's mother. And she wasn't, obviously she wasn't there, but there was some other woman. And there was this headmaster, was this young guy. He was a small young guy. I went into his office. I couldn't imagine. And he gave me he took me around, showed me, just took me out and explained things. And it was a sweet thing, And I remember going up to Kirstenbosch. Was it Kirstenbosch? Where LaRue was working. He died. And he was busy. I thought I'd drop in and see if he was there, say hello to him. Yeah, look, it's a strange thing because I was not somebody who ever was comfortable with wearing a tie and a blazer and haircuts. And my dream was my brother went to Progress. I thought, send me to Progress for God's sake, you know. I just wanted to be, I wasn't smoking at that stage till later, but I thought, God, let me, and part of the reason I deferred the army till after university was so I could grow my hair. I thought, at least let me grow my hair before I die, you know, if I'm going to get, and my tennis partner in the third team was Harry Tron, and he was shot dead in the army, you know. He was a lovely guy, he was a year ahead of us. I keep saying everybody's a lovely guy, and I mean, you know, affection. I remember playing Hutzler with Harry Tron, and he had quite a wild, so he was quite a, you know, and he got really angry with these guys, and because I lobbed from the back at their courts. They kept sitting down and sulking and this kind, and I lobbed, and they called it out, and Harry was at the net, and he called it in, and I said, Harry, give it. It's just a game, for God. He was really, really angry, and I thought afterwards that he probably thought 3 Jews I'm up against. No, I'm sure he didn't. But he was. I was so flattered that Harry wanted to play with me because he was an older, you know. Yeah. And I think he and I were by some total misjudgment, was put in the elite cadet group. I couldn't even march with my arms straight. You know, when we used to have to do a kind of about turn, I used to kind of try and get my legs in sync with other people's movements. Fortunately, we didn't have to compete. I don't know how I ended up in that. Yeah, look, you know, but SACS, you know, memories. Yeah, look, I don't want to dwell on it because it's more. My wife's a very private sort of person, but we had to leave. We had to leave the country because of marriage and the laws of the land. And I came out in February 80, and I remember seeing you at a Bob Dylan concert in Sydney Entertainment Centre in 86.
Right.
So I was there 82, and Joni Mitchell came out in 83, and Van Morrison. I saw some music, Elvis Costello. So it was a big. But I remember I didn't come for the music. I had to find a job very quickly, and because I studied journalism at Stellenbosch, I had a couple of job trials and ended up working within weeks for what was then, and I think might still be, Australia's only daily suburban paper. So we would hammer it. We were working flat out, and it was pretty challenging because you're actually reporting. You're not sub-editing. You're out reporting on essentially a foreign country so every time you get the nuances wrong, or you get, you know, it's glaringly obvious, and you don't have and you know, and it was a great learning, fantastic way to get to know the country. And after a couple of years, I got a call from news editor of the Sydney Morning Herald and said they were starting up a regional, what was called the Northern Herald at the time, and they needed a local, and I was the local guy. I was there. I'd become, within 3 years, I had all the local knowledge. So they hired me. And I remember thinking when he rang Alan Peterson, he said, "My name's Alan Peterson." It was late for us. We'd knock off early and go to the pub at the Stain. And Alan Peterson said, you know, he rang me, and he, you know, it was kind of, you know, he was the news editor of the Sydney Morning Herald, and I think I got a job for you. And I thought this is a joke. There's somebody's pulling my leg, you know. It's like, it was unthinkable. So I said to him, I had another call, and I would ring him back. And I rang his switchboard, and I said, do you have an Alan Peterson on your staff? And they said, yes, the news editor. I said, can you put me through to him? And a week later, he gave me a job. So I worked for them, and then I worked for the main Herald. I worked for, went into the main paper as a general news writer, and I was then made, I know it sounds, I was sent to given the job at Melbourne to run the Melbourne bureau chief. I came down and then switched to the Sunday Age when it started in Melbourne. Switched to the Age, eventually left, went after, so this is decades on, and 2000 and whenever, went to Swinburne University, taught journalism, did a PhD there, and then got back into writing. Just got obsessive about poems and poetry again, and working on another book of poems, and even wrote a poem in Afrikaans and in English, which Hichu, my friend, helped translate or tweaked it. And I called the book of poems Patkos, which I told people was here, and I told people in South Africa, which was an island in Greece, off Greece, a Greek island, Patkos. But yeah, look, and which you've got, I think you've got a copy of it. And I wrote another book at some point called The Wild Armored Lion, which was a book about growing up in South Africa. And in fact, I'll wave it in front of you. This was The Wild Armored Lion. It's out of print, so I'm not trying to flog it. And this was Patkos, which you've got on your thing there. This is my son's artwork on the thing. And I'm trying to, there's a guy I'm friendly with here who wrote the foreword, is the editing, and we've started a kind of collective, poetry collective, which he reckons is a collective of 2 at the moment. And we're going to bring out the poems. And we have these long calls. He lives in country Victoria, and we work through that. And so taking photographs of birds a bit obsessively since lockdown. I became we had sort of lockdown here, and I figured I think you got to know the place, you got to know your place that you live in. And I never felt that I really knew had a sense of where I am, and I felt that I would explore it. And I used to go off on my bike and photograph the creek. It's called Mulum Creek, and just became engaged and really with the bird life and that. And so that's a big part of just living in the place you live in, which for me was a lot easier in Sydney, because I lived in Manly, and I used to get a ferry to work, and it was a beautiful place to be. And it took me a long time to see the beauty of where I am. And so it's the equivalent as if I was in Cape Town, I'd probably go down to the Lispik River and wander down the Lispik, and I don't know what the bird life is or whatever the life is down there, but you get a sense of place and space of wherever you are. Yeah. The other thing I did was, when I was teaching journalism, I edited a publication of student journalism, and I loved teaching. It was just weird. I mean, I really felt that I had 30 odd years of, maybe not 30, maybe 25 or so years as a working journalist. And I'd got into journalism with just a sense of wanting to write and needing to make a living. Poetry wasn't going to do it. So I kept the poetry going and as a side thing. But the experience of working as a journalist and interviewing everybody from musicians like Abdullah Ibrahim and Miriam Makeba and so South African musicians, even Lucky Dube, and going to Cape Town and interviewing Brayden Buitenbach and Seamus Heaney and just ordinary, not names that are not names or whatever, local musicians. Rene, people might not have heard of Rene Gayo, who's big here, and I went on a tram. I ran on Facebook recently, a tram ride with her. And then becoming absolutely fixated on asylum seeker, the treatment of refugees and asylum, and making that a kind of a specialized area of writing about for the Sunday age and the age, particularly the Sunday at a particular time when people would be detained in remote detention centers and coming in, and I was writing their stories, and that became the guts of a PhD that I did, and a book which is not yet published. And and just a sort of an ongoing sense of what a piece of luck it's been, and how much of that goes back to a class where, you know, Doug Brown calls you aside before in the hall. You're standing outside next to Dewis Campbell's class, Doug Brown's class, and you're lining up and you're about to go in, and Doug Brown comes to me and says, "I want you to keep quiet in this class," and writes up on the blackboard a poem that I wrote, which is in Patkus, "No bird clings to the sky for dear life, no sky," and gets the class. And I remember Greg Boyd had a wonderful, and people had a wonderful, not knowing who'd written it, and at the end said, you know, and I was so flattered by it. You know, that was such a sweet thing to do. You know, I thought, God, you know, just a few words, and he took it seriously. And then years later, I remember, you know, visiting my mother and driving down near Rondebosch Common, and I saw Doug Brown jogging years later. And I shouted from this old car I was driving, "Mr. Brown." And he sort of looked around, and I said, "It's Larry Schwartz." And he waved and he said, "Hello, Barry." But, you know, like, so, you know, there's a mix of memories of, I never was crazy about the prefect system or whatever it is, but I kind of thought about this, and I thought, I'm not going to raise anything that is negative or anything, because there was such sweetness. We were just, you know, it's part of the privilege. And I guess it was part of the privilege. My father went to SACS. I always joke that my father went to SACS, and when it was still in the city, when it was near Michaelis. And you know, other people come to school and they look up and they see their father in this team and that thing. There was no trace of my father. There was no trace. He used to say, his position in the soccer team, I don't know if there was a soccer team, it was left behind or left outside, you know, and he had a good humor about that sort of thing. But I look back, and I remember when my boys went to the local school, you know, Mullum and then Norwood, I realized that we had such a privileged education. Look at the facilities and the opportunities, and I could never get them, you know, until I sent my youngest son, but he went, his last 3 years were at Rudolf Steiner School, yeah. And I thought that it was such a creative space that I thought, if there's reincarnation, I'd like to come back as a Rudolf Steiner kid. Sorry, SACS. But yeah, we were really lucky. We just had a really gifted time, and I look back at it now, and I'm still doing stuff that was inspired by going to English class with Mr. Orford, drawing up a list, and the list had books by Steinbeck and Salinger and whoever, and you know, there was great the gift of a decent education, which is and it prepared us well. You know, you and I went and did Latin with Whiteford. Who stood up in the front of the Latin class, and everybody was too scared to sit in the front rows, and he said, are these seats reserved? And the SACS, I was scraped into E1 or something. I always thought it was not a good idea to have E1, E2, E3, E4, A5, whatever it was. And I think it's really interesting that a lot of the guys who were not in that E1 stream made the great success of whatever they did, and that it obviously didn't get the measure of people's gifts and people's ability, but there was so much that was really good. I grew up in a house in Bishop's Court, which is so far from the life I live now in outer suburban, quite a pretty part, but in a nice city, and but is so far removed. I can't imagine growing up. I joke sometimes that we're going to put a tennis court at the back So this is we grew up in real, relative, absolute, unimaginable luxury compared to my kids. My kids grow up in a different. I'm not saying they have a hardship; they're in a great space. But yeah, we grew up in privilege at the time. So I always joke that I'm in the middle of the Bible Belt, but it's the wrong testament. and that's just force of. I'm happy to be where I am, but I don't. My brother lives in about 20 minutes away from me, and lately I've been, we've had, my wife is really ill, so he's been in touch on a daily basis to see how I'm going. But I kind of think that when I first came to Melbourne, I moved into an area which was very South African called Doncaster.
Yes.
And on the right side of me was a South African on the left side. And I kind of thought if I wanted to live in South Africa, I'd live in South Africa. I was kind of happy just to have. I've got strong connections. We had a headmaster called Whiteford who got up on stage one day and said, and you can correct me if my memory is wrong, he said, remember, don't forget. He didn't say, go to the anti-sluggard, but he said, remember that the woman who makes your breakfast got up at 4 a.m. somewhere to leave her children to get to your thing, whatever. Something like that. Don't forget it's the color of your skin or whatever it was. And that for that time, that was a bold thing to say to kids at a school like SACS. And I mean, forever grateful to him for having that kind of perspective. And it's interesting, the people you fear, SACS, Whiteford, I remember being sent to him because somebody caught us. We get together at the bus stop to smoke. I didn't smoke at the time, but we figured we could miss assembly by hanging out on the E6 Kirstenbosch line and smoking, and then arriving, everybody's in assembly, and then just go into the classroom and they come and they join. And I think it was Alex, caught us, and we were sent to Whiteford. And I remember I didn't want to contradict anybody's story, so I made up a story which was, look, I'm at fault. I don't know about these other guys, their stories, but I'm a guy who overslept. And I came down and he said, yeah, but they said, and I said, no, I'm sure they're right, but I'm wrong. I overslept. So if you want to punish me, punish me. I thought if with Whiteford is too clever, and if I started making up bullshit, he'd catch me out. So I said, look, I've slept and I arrived, and he said, yeah, but they said. I said, well, I'm not arguing. I'm not contradicting them. I'm just saying, punish me. But we met him at university, and I remember what happened? He gave me a warning. And I don't think he punished the other guys either. They came up with some coherent story. I would have contradicted. If I'd got in it, I would have stuffed up and undermined. So I threw myself. But I remember at varsity walking up towards the Jago Library with Whiteford, talking to him. And he was quite a personable guy, He was, when you took away those hierarchical structures, Whiteford was, he was just another, he was a very smart guy, I guess. I don't remember the conversations, but I do remember brief, maybe it was about Latin or something, I don't know. But and the person I haven't mentioned, I'll never forget, after matric, Tony Katz had a party. And at the party, he invited one teacher, Duis Campbell, and Duis Campbell told us, because we used to have Latin classes where, Mike Canty used to, there's the famous one where Duis said, Mike Canty, your years as a public entertainer have come to, and they finally come to, and Mike bowed. But we used to have chariot races, which would force Duis back with Charles Edelstein whipping, and we had his cousin Rifkin's translation, and we'd pass it around when we were supposed to be, and we'd have to struggle to pretend we were struggling. We'd have the thing in front of us and we'd kind of, stammer over it. And Duis Campbell said, there were times when things were so funny that Candy or somebody said that he had to blow his nose so that he didn't laugh in class. And seriously, I don't know if this has come out with anybody else, but he said this, and I thought, because he had a gruff exterior as well. He was quite a rough looking, and I thought, what a lovely thing, and how wise was it of Tony Katz, to invite him, of all people, to a post-matric party. I thought, what a nice thing, what a lovely guy, and to put up with us. And, there were jokes about Nancy Rowland, who was full of ink that was thrown at him, and, there all this kind of stuff, I'm sure you hear it from everyone. But, he wasn't a teacher. And you guys, some of you guys had the benefit of Louis Knutzer, taught Afrikaans. I didn't have that privilege of Louis Knutzer. There's nothing wrong with Mariki Basson, but, Louis Knutzer apparently was an inspiring teacher. But yeah, look, we did all right. We did all right. I have no complaints. There's reincarnation. Let me grow my hair. Let me not wear a boat. Fat guys don't wear ties. Fat guys don't do ties too well. Haircuts. But other than that, no cadets, please. And a memory that, I always distrust I always say, do I really remember this? But my memory was in national service, in a queue, in a line, waiting with Axel Kessler next to me. And I remember saying to Axel, and I'm sure, it's quite possible that Axel will say this never happened, but I'm just giving it to you, and you do the. But I said, Axel, because I was totally traumatized while they were getting a basic training. We come in there, got a sign up saying Blutsweet line and all this kind of stuff, and you get, before you get the rhythm of it, and he was posted out somewhere else soon afterwards. But I remember, because he was with us in that first year law we did together. Axel was one of the guys. I remember him saying to him, "So Axel, this is what being a boarder must have been like." And he said, and this is where he can correct me on this and challenge me, but my memory is he said, "No, Larry, this is much worse." Oh God, yeah. Anyway, memories. Thanks. And is there anything else I can share?
Larry,
if anybody wants to, there's something called larrysschwartzwriter.com, which is my website. I try to, a colleague of mine from Swinburne created this thing, and I put up a huge amount of, I've there's stories, interviews I did. It sounds far-fetched, but I interviewed Ray Charles and Neil Young and Robbie Robertson, but also, poets and stories about going country, and less of the asylum seeker stuff, which is part of my book, and poems, and there's recordings of. So if anybody really wants to check out, it's larrysschwartzwriter.com. That's there. I've got recordings in the poetry section of poetry readings with this friend of mine playing music, and the friend who will be known to some of you is a guy called Bobby Beck, who lives in WA and runs a yoga center, and his musical backing, and there's one where I play oud in the backing of reading a one, and he's put the music to this. So no complaints. Years ago, found a recording when I used to review music, and I found a recording by a Sydney oud player called Joseph Tavadros, who is a Coptic, Egyptian migrant as a kid, and is probably the greatest Australian now, one of the great oud players. And I just loved that instrument, and I discovered a close friend was a professional oud player. And then my friend Bobby and I used to share music in lockdown from WA to here, and he wanted me to jam with him. And but he said, you need to learn the scales, and then he plays all these instruments. He plays a sitar, and he plays all this, and one day he said, he sent me a guitar once, and one day he sent me this oud arrived, and I immediately got in touch with my friend who's teaches, and once a week, and tomorrow night, I have a lesson in this beautiful instrument. And the player, my teacher, is this wonderful. He actually teaches guitar as well. But the oud is just so. If you'd like me to do it, I'd be happy to play it. So long as you know that it's not star stuff. It's just, it's aspirational. It's learner stuff. I think SACS coming to Australia, even though when I go to Cape Town, I think Cape Town is a very special place. The Boland is special when I go back to visit there. But Cape Town is really, really special. Wherever we are, I'm happy that I'm not surrounded by entitled people, but I'm wherever you are, I just look at it all as just a piece of luck and good fortune. And I think you quite easily could see that, how do you measure the people's success in life and that? And I think, however we've turned out, we've had a real good start. SACS gave us a pretty good foundation. Even if I was the Naarloopers, one of the guys who hit the road the minute the bell went and got the hell out of town, and didn't stick around and really, really take advantage of all that was there. We were lucky, and we had a good, and attested by what you're doing with and the goodwill you're finding, and the fact that people, and I'd love to see. I think once I went back and I've seen Graham Belair's and Mike Canty. I've seen Graham Boxall once, with Derek de Jong once, went to Forries. But generally, I'd love to catch up with people. But I just can't make